Here you are. Very good to see everyone again. Just get everybody in before we start. It's extraordinary, all this. Our place feels like Vimalakirti's house. It can sort of expand to include 120 people, 130 people, no problem at all. Really easy. Yeah. Okay. You just scroll through for me, Pajama. Let's just check that everybody looks like they're ready to go. A bit slow, isn't it? Okay, let's not worry. Yeah. Those of you I can see, oh look, like you're raring to start. So, welcome to wherever we are, day 2, session 4. And in the last session, we looked at the piece of advice, number 10. So another of the relative bodhicitta ones, start the process of exchange with yourself. And we did a meditation, really opening to whatever suffering and difficulties we had in the present, and then going into the future, into what we could imagine was going to come for us, and opening to that and connecting that to the refuge, and with the out breath, sending whatever resources we were going to need, whatever was going to be helpful, whatever qualities, they all went to our unfolding future being, so to speak. Okay, so this evening, so where are we? So we've trained in the preliminaries. We've started to think of things as dreamlike, and we've also done some of the relative bodhicitta pieces of advice. So we've begun the giving and receiving with the breathing, and we've had a go at doing that, exchanging with ourselves. So we've at least touched on numbers 1, 2, 7, and 10. So this evening I'd like to do 8 and 9. So we will have done all the relative bodhicitta precepts, or at least explored them a bit. Some things we'll return to over the next few days, and probably again in March. So let's look at number 8, which says, there are 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 roots of virtue. And in a few places in the text that we've given you, there are little bits in square brackets, and those are just, they're not really part of the text, they're just helpful hints. If we don't remember, what the 3 objects are, okay, they're pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, and so on. Some of the things in brackets, I don't think that the terminology is quite right. I think I took it a long time ago from one of the translations of the 7-point mind training. So I'd probably think more of craving, aversion, and ignorance for the 3 poisons. And the 3 roots of virtue, desirelessness, yeah, maybe. Yes, I'm not sure about those translations. We'll come to those in a minute. So we've got these 3 objects, 3 roots of virtue, and the 3 poisons. So what's this all about? So the 3 objects are by objects, it means appearances to the senses. Yeah. So whatever appears to the five senses and also to the mind sense. So the thoughts and so on, all that. So those are the appearances, and all these appearances to the senses come, as it were, pre-packaged with a feeling tone. So as we know, they're pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And when we encounter these appearances to the senses with that feeling tone, very easily in response, we produce one of the three poisons. We produce craving for something that has a pleasant feeling tone, aversion to something that has an unpleasant feeling tone, and a sort of indifference. It's ignorance, but not so much ignorance in the sense of really not knowing the nature of reality in some deep sense. It's more in the sense of just ignoring. It's like something which has a neutral tone to it. Often we just sort of blank out. We just dull out because what's happening it doesn't connect with our sort of ego project. Yeah. Even if what's happening may be another person, even, but we're just not interested. So there's a sort of dulling of mind until something turns up that stimulates us in some way, something that has a strong pleasant or unpleasant tone to it. Okay, so that's all basic Dharma. Shouldn't be any great shocks and surprises there. And we can apply where the different feelings catalyze, trigger those poisons. We can apply all the Dharma that we know to that situation. But the mind training takes a particular approach, which is what this 8th piece of advice is about. And this piece of advice, the commentaries usually say, is about how to act outside of meditation. Yeah, so in everyday life. And what's being suggested is that when we catch a poison arising, triggered by the feeling of associated with a sense appearance, we use that as a trigger to remember the refuge, and we take what's happening actually into our practice. So it's not so much that we're trying to confront the poison. Yeah. We're skillfully kind of using it as something which will start us into a very skillful mental state, a skillful way of being. So how does this work? So let's say that, what should we go for? Take your favorite poison. I don't know, I like them all. Let's go for aversion, say, yeah. So something unpleasant happens, or someone whom we interpret as unpleasant happens, and there's this feeling of aversion there. And if we manage to bring awareness to it, and we're more likely to bring awareness, or awareness is more likely to arise if we've been training with the giving and receiving and the mind training, we notice that this aversion is actually suffering. Very often aversion arises, somebody tells us that they were going to do something for us today and now they can't, or or they haven't because they forgot, and aversion arises, and we just build on that. But if we manage to get that gap of awareness, then we notice that that feeling of irritation, frustration, sudden dislike of this person is actually suffering. It's dukkha. There's a kind of contraction of the body. There's a kind of contraction of our being. And it's not actually a very pleasant way to be. It's not a very pleasant experience. So once we catch the fact that there is dukkha there, then instead of closing down around it, when we're trained in this approach, the next thing that arises is an opening, because we become aware of all the other beings, all the other people around the globe who have been let down, who are feeling frustrated, who are feeling resentful, who are feeling irritated, and all that mass of suffering that's there. Just as we feel it, so they're all feeling it too. So that opens it out. It takes it into a Dharma arena. It sort of depersonalizes it. And then the next stage is that we practice, as with the giving and receiving, we practice giving and receiving with it, and we imagine taking away all that tension, all that all these beings are feeling, and we take it into the refuge. We take it into the refuge in our heart. We imagine it all dissolving away, and we send whatever's needed, whatever helps, whatever allows people to relax, to be at peace, to be at ease, to not be caught up in it, to kind of let it go. And that also has the effect on us as well. So what started off as something which was heading in a nasty direction, through awareness and training our mind, becomes a catalyst, a trigger for something really positive. Something negative happens, we catch it, and our first response is awareness of the refuge in our heart. So we find the resources, the deep resources to deal with the situation rather than just getting lost. Our second response is an opening and an empathy to other beings. And then the third response is a compassion that wants to take away that suffering, and a feeling of the qualities that could be there instead, and a sharing of those, a generosity. So there's a tremendous kind of positive build on top of what started off as something which looked like it was going to be really a bit of a disaster. All this just with training in this way. So we take the poisons, as it were, as the beginning of developing wholesome roots, these 3 roots of virtue. You get the idea. So I often think of it as a bit like in judo. One of the things about judo is that you kind of use the weight of the opponent to, or the person, I think they talk about judo players, the person you're playing judo with, you use their weight, their momentum, and you just sort of divert it in a direction that helps. So it's like you use that sort of momentum of the appearance of the klesha, and you take it down this really positive track. And the more we train in this, the easier it becomes. To start with, it's all a bit kind of clunky and artificial, and we don't fully kind of believe it, maybe. So now it's really, with more practice, it starts to become second nature. It starts to become something that we naturally do. And then, yeah, we're really going well.
We've had a request to repeat the 3 routes, the 3 responses.
Well, the 3 responses, I mean, would be the opposite of craving, aversion, and ignorance. And it's, in a way, it's much more specific than that. It's like whatever the particular kind of suffering, whatever feels as if it's will relieve that, whatever resource, whatever qualities will specifically relieve that, that's what comes from the refuge. Yeah. So this can be, we can do this with our own suffering. We can do this with our own kleshas when they arise. We can also use, when we're with somebody else who's having a klesha attack, we can do the same thing with them, yeah? Or someone who is suffering. Yeah, let's say there's someone who's angry or anxious, and we're not actually caught up in it. We've managed not to just get sucked into it. We managed to produce some awareness. And again, with this person, we become aware that that anxiety, that anger is just suffering. It hurts when you come right down to it. Yeah, it's a response to that sort of dart of dukkha that's sort of lodged in them. Yeah. So again, there can be a heart longing for them not to suffer. And a real desire to want to help. And we can't take people's kleshas away, sadly. If the Buddhas could do it, we'd all be klesha free by now. But we can at least make this sort of wish internally, or this movement of our being. Yeah, may this suffering that they're undergoing now, yeah, may it come to me. Yeah, may they be free of it. And again, we contact the refuge in our heart. And at least in imagination, we imagine that cause of suffering in them being taken away, them being relieved of it, and being eased of it. And whatever's needed, whatever helps, going from the refuge to them. Yeah. And yeah, sometimes, yeah, we can't, if we're with somebody who's in a really difficult mental state, it's not like we can change that directly. But sometimes if we're just there, not playing into it in any way, but just really open to them with a really open heart, that is a condition in itself for something in them to change, yeah? For something in them not to be perpetuated, to be continued. Essentially, this is a mind training. So, yeah, if we practice doing the giving and receiving with somebody, you know, perhaps over weeks, and we find, oh, you know, we meet them and they're still no better than they were before. Yeah. That doesn't mean that, you know, somehow we've failed in the practice. You know, fundamentally, we're training our own heart mind. Yeah, we're training our heart mind to move in the direction of bodhicitta more and more and more. Yeah, to open more and more and more. That's what it's fundamentally about. But the more open-hearted we are, yeah, we will have an effect on life. So something of that will have an effect, directly or indirectly. Something else I should say about all that will be helpful. Yeah, maybe it's just good to keep restating just what can happen as we train with this. So yeah, there's something which is a cause of suffering, and we're training to recognize it as suffering, and for that to trigger a movement in us of turning towards the refuge. So we're finding the resources. Very often with ourselves and with others, we feel like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. I don't know what to do about myself even. And that triggers a certain kind of level of anxiety, which then adds to the situation so that we respond not very well at all. So this is training us, okay, this is happening, and there's the refuge. There's these qualities. To find that source in our heart, to really feel those qualities right there in the core of our being, and then to open that it's, if we're suffering, we open to the fact that, okay, there are all kinds of other beings who are suffering like us. So often when we're in a difficult mental state, we feel like we're the only one who's really suffering like this. It's like we get very closed in on ourselves. And so this kind of opens us out, and it gives us a sense of perspective. It gives us a sense of connection with other beings. Yeah. There are all these other people who are suffering in the way that we are. So there's a sort of sense of fellow feeling and sort of kind of solidarity with other life. Yeah. And a sense of empathy. Oh yes, this must be what they feel like too. Yeah. And then there's that wish to relieve the suffering. So there's a strengthening of that compassion, and imagining taking it into our heart, and then the refuge producing the response that's most helpful, that's most appropriate, that's most beneficial, and that going to us, to all beings who suffer like this. So the poisons then trigger these skillful mental states in response. Okay, I hope that's, we'll be practicing this at least in meditation more over these next few days. Yeah, so it's a very skillful way to practice. Yeah. So I'd like briefly also to look at the next one, the last one of the relative bodhicitta pieces of advice in this second section. So number 9, in all activities, train with sayings. So in other words, train with pieces of advice like this, train with pieces of Dharma. And there are different ways in which you can do this. Trungpa Rinpoche, with his students, he based a whole way of practice on the 7-point mind training. They produced cards with the pieces of advice, one written on each card. And like at the beginning of each day, or whenever you felt you needed to, you would sort of go through, a bit like consulting the I Ching or something, and you pick a card and you would work with that piece of advice for that day or that week or however long it was. Or if you weren't sure what to do in a situation, you might do the same thing. You pick something, a bit like consulting the I Ching, and so you receive this piece of Dharma advice, and then you'd really work with that in the situation. More generally, it's just suggesting that we do use, we maybe learn by heart, short pieces of Dharma. I know some people who learn whole Dharma texts, but if you've come across a piece of Dharma that feels like it really sort of speaks to you and speaks to how you are in certain conditions, it's really good to just, if you can commit that to memory and learn it. And at times you can almost repeat it like a mantra if you want, to get it to the point where in the situation where it applies, it's like it comes, it pops up, it comes into mind. And I've done a certain amount of this over the years, could have done more. So for instance, there's a lot of anxiety around at the moment, understandably, with the pandemic. So and I've been quite good at anxiety over the years. I've managed to get quite a lot of it going. So I found it really helpful to take a couple of lines from Shantideva about if there's something you can do about it, why worry? If there's nothing you can do about it, why worry? And I just sort of took that in, 40 years ago, whatever. And it comes at times to my rescue when I'm starting to kind of get really kind of caught up in, what do I do about this? And what if that? It's like this just comes in. Yeah, so in that sort of way, we can use these pieces of advice, find ones that feel like, oh yes, that's talking to me. That would be really helpful. Something else that I personally use a lot is it's sometimes called the wish, even the prayer, to avoid hope and fear. So in a situation where you've got quite a lot of sort of invested in something going well, and there's a lot of, oh yes, maybe it'll go well. Oh no, maybe it won't go well. Maybe it will. No, maybe it won't. Those hopes and fears. One of the bits of Dharma that's recommended is that you just make the real wish, whatever is for the best, may that happen. And then you sort of put it down, it kind of cuts through the hopes and fears. Whatever's for the best, may that happen. And you just let it rest there. You sort of entrust it to the Dharma, that situation. So whatever works for you, but the idea is that we learn these things by enough repetition. This whole kind of approach of giving and receiving, and also these little bits of Dharma, these pieces of advice, so that they start to become second nature. They start to pop up. They start to come to our rescue when we need them. Okay. So then that's probably enough for one day in terms of presentation. So I've had a few questions. If anyone's has anything out of today, by all means drop me an email. And tomorrow we'll probably start into section 3, transforming bad circumstances into the way of awakening, which actually we've already begun with that way of responding to the 3 poisons. Okay, so let's now do some meditation together. Finish the day off. Well, for those of us who are in the evening here. So letting everything be. Just aware. Now feeling the support of the earth. Relaxing, giving it our weight. And as well as our physical weight, giving the earth anything else that's weighing us down. Anything we've been holding on to. With that, there can be a sense of lightness and freedom in the upper body. Letting awareness fill the whole body. letting kindness fill the whole body. Now letting energy and awareness gather in our heart center. Now let's practice some of this mind training. So let's call to mind a situation that tends to produce a klesha in us. Maybe not the greatest klesha attack that we ever have. It's something that definitely provokes a negative, a difficult reaction, anger, craving, fear, whatever it is. Let's feel our way into that typical situation. So a person or a situation appear through the senses. And that triggers a reaction. And through Dharma training, awareness can arise that knows this is happening. So we know what's going on. And in this mind training, firstly, we become aware of how this klesha is suffering. Can we feel the way in which it affects our body, our energy, how something in us tightens and constricts? Now, the next stage is that in response to that suffering, we turn towards the refuge. So we have a sense of the refuge in our heart. The refuge, which is a refuge from suffering. However it presents itself to us. Really dwelling in that sense of the refuge, right in our heart center. And once we're well in touch with that sense of strength and those deep resources, those qualities of awakening, then we open out our awareness. We become aware of all kinds of other beings, all other kinds of other people like us, or even externally seemingly very different from us. Who all suffer through producing this klesha, this reaction, when presented with certain kinds of situation or people or events. Become aware of all these beings who suffer just as we do. And we let our awareness of that mass of suffering produce the wish that they may all be free. All be free of this tension, this unease, this pain, this dart of dukkha. And with each in-breath, we imagine, we feel, maybe we see all the suffering of that klesha being taken away, taken into the refuge in our heart. Dissolving away. And with the out-breath, for us and for all beings, there are the resources, the qualities, whatever's needed for us and all these beings to be at ease, to be relieved, to be released. Really feeling and seeing the suffering disappearing. All these beings breathing freely, lighter, easy in themselves. And when we're ready, relaxing. Just open to our experience as it is now. And sharing the benefits of this meditation, this day of practice, with all beings. So we can do a practice like that with any situation, any klesha. We can do it in meditation, but the more we train, we can just, that process can become sort of second nature, so that we notice a reaction in ourselves that's causing suffering. And just in a few seconds, it sort of becomes natural to find the refuge and open to all those who suffer in a similar way, and practice giving and receiving. Okay, so that's it for day 2. Wish you all very well until, hope to see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Vessantara.
Very welcome.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you very
Dhammaraji.
much, Mantra.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.